We're going to start the question period now with questions from the advisors.
Hi, thank you. That was a wonderful presentation. And I want to congratulate you on that accomplishment. I mean, how many people your age can say they've published a book? That's amazing. I wanted to ask you just what you found was the most difficult challenge when you were writing your stories?
Well, I think definitely the most challenging part was not biting off more than I can chew, especially with short stories. They're meant to be short. So in terms of plot line and characters, with a few of my stories, I think I felt like, oh yeah, I can totally write 6,000 words on this. Like, I could totally do that in 2 weeks. And then it turned out I couldn't. So I think that's why I had to cliffhang a lot of them. And I think that was the biggest challenge for me.
Great, thank you. I just had one more question, which is, we've all had influences and inspirations, and I wanted to ask you what were the major influences that made you want to become a writer, or at least to write, let's put it that way.
I think the biggest influence for me was having people believe in me and my writing. Like, they believed that my writing was actually good and that my skill could actually take me to places. So, and I think also I come from a long line of artists in my family, and I've always wanted to create images, but with drawing, I always end up thinking it's not good enough, or I can improve. Like, I look back on it a few days later and I'll be like, why did I think that was good? It's always that kind of negative, influence from myself. But then with the images created in writing, they're perfect to me. Like, I can read one of my stories and I believe it. I believe that it's true, and I'll be like, this is great. Like, how did I come up with this on the spot? And it gives me the emotions I'm supposed to feel in my writing. And I think that those are the two biggest influences for me.
Great, thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, great job, Eden, and your presentation was fantastic, your slideshow and your readings. I have always been so impressed and amazed by your ideas, because you have fantastic ideas and you really have your own unique writer's voice. And when people are trying to help you, especially in the context of Masterworks or being in school, how do you take that advice and not let it affect your authentic writer's voice? Is advice helpful? Is it not helpful?
Well, I would think that advice is helpful, especially when it comes from the right people. And most of the advice I think I received in our meetings and just from talking with Charlotte throughout the year has been mostly on the formatting of my stories, not necessarily on the creativity, on the ideas. So when it comes to advice, I go with my gut. Like, do I put this in or do I not? Like, does this fit? Or do I like my word choice better than what they've suggested? Like, it's really, I think it just comes down to how do I feel this advice will impact the story and the creative process for me.
Yeah, I just admire your author voice. So in that, what would you say to somebody else in next year if they chose writing to be their Masterworks? What words of wisdom do you have for them?
Don't procrastinate with writing your stories, because then they will be rushed and you will not have any time to make them good or to write them or to even finish them. So, and also I would just say try new things, experiment with point of view. I didn't I didn't think I would ever write a short story in first person, because I enjoy describing where you can see the looks on their faces from other people's perspective. But then Grave of Sand, that's actually one of my favorite stories, and it's completely different than what I thought I would ever write. So just don't procrastinate, that's the big one.
Okay.
Congratulations, Ms. Vela-Martinez. I just have one actually quick question. Out of all your stories and all the characters you created, who was your favorite to write? This is a surprise question.
Definitely Aliens Prefer Decaf and Grave of Sand. Those are my two favorite stories. And I think it was fun to write Grave of Sand because it's set in 1927, so the way the characters think, especially about each other, coming from, I mean, one's from England in the 1920s, and the other comes from Egypt. So at the beginning of the story, you can actually see he refers to him as the Egyptian. He doesn't refer to him by his name. And then slowly, as they start to bond, when they're forced together in this really harsh situation, he starts to call him by his name and actually acknowledging what this man does. And then, so that was really interesting to write for me. And then with Aliens Prefer Decaf, Benji, I really felt really close to Benji because I think he's the most, I mean, the other most human character I had was a schizophrenic psychopath. So, I mean,
That's true. That was a dark character.
who was nowhere close to like my age. So with writing Benji, that was really fun because you see he has so many emotions, especially after what has happened to him. He's been forced through this situation, and he feels alone through most of the story. And so it was really interesting to write about how he feels lonely, about that feeling, how it physically feels for him. And then suddenly, this surprise person comes into his life and completely turns it upside down on its head. And so it was really nice to write him as like a young person and as just someone who has conflicting morals and just as a human.
Awesome. Congratulations again. It was great working with you.
Ms. Vela-Martinez, I have a question for you, and the fact that you've written 4 stories, all in different genre, is impressive, for one. How do you get your head from going from a horror story in the setting, and that story scared the pants off me, by the way, and how do you get into historical fiction? Like, do you have to put yourself in a different mind frame in order to write in a totally different genre?
Well, normally for me, I take since I wrote Case 189, the horror story, last year, and then I only edited it in September, that one was the farthest away from any of my other stories in terms of, I just finished writing this story, I have to start the next one now. So that was nice to have that gap, because then my brain wasn't all in like the horror, like I need this to look scary, it needs to be good, it needs to be good scary. So actually I think for all my stories, I took maybe a break of about like a week and a half, 2 weeks, between when I would end a story and then start writing a new one. Mostly because then in that week and a half or 2 weeks, I can brainstorm about what I want the story to feel, like what the emotions that the readers need to feel when reading this story. I can think about all those minor details, and that gets me into the mindset and ready to write in the new genre that I need to write in.
Great.
Hello.
Hi.
Miss Vela-Martinez, that was impressive, very impressive. I have a question, and I'm afraid of your answer. I would say, firstly, that I agree with your characterization that writing can be prosaic. I agree with that. And the reason I say that is that I'm in the middle of trying to write a book right now, and I've been working for 5 months, 5 hours a day, writing this book. It's nonfiction. It's about education. Surprise, surprise. And it's nonfiction. But one of the things that I found is how incredibly slow I am at writing. So my question to you that I don't really want to know the answer to is, like, how many words do you write in an hour or in a day? Because I know how many I write, and it's not pretty. Because you said, you know, oh, I completed Criminal Tie after a week of writing and editing. 1 week she finishes Criminal. I was happy when you said, oh, I can't do 6,000 words in 2 weeks. Oh, well, surprise, surprise. So how many words do you actually write, you little speedball?
Well, with A Criminal Tie, I wrote sections of it throughout the 3 months, and then I realized in the 1 week, like, bad word, my deadline's in 1 week. And so I was at the computer for most evenings after school, typing for I normally regulated myself to about an hour, because otherwise I just get burned out. There's no creative juice anymore. It's just I can't think about this story anymore. But in that, I would normally write maybe, if I thought it through well enough, and I wanted it, if it was perfect at the end of that hour of writing, maybe write like a page, just under a page, just over a page. It really depended on the story for me, because for some of them, I connected with them more.
One page being, 3 to 5 paragraphs. So here's me, 5 hours a day.
Size 11 font, single-spaced.
5 hours a day, 500 words, 1,000 words max, if I can pull it off in 5 hours, right? So it must be fiction. Fiction must be easier than, nonfiction.
You just make it up.
That's what I'm thinking.
Just make it up.
It's easy, it's worth it. One other quick question. How do we get a copy of your book? There's an associated question. Would you be interested in having it converted to film? I know a couple of film writers who are looking for writers. So how do you get a copy of your book?
Well, I'm actually selling. I have 5 copies here for sale today. They're $20.
Oh.
We just got them shipped in yesterday, actually,
Okay.
very last minute. And then we can, if there are more people interested than just 5, then we can place orders and get another batch order.
Put me on the list.
Okay.
So for a young writer like me looking to start quite a long novel to win a bet with my father for 50 pages, do you have anything that could help me on that?
Well, I've never actually written a long novel because whenever I try to, I write about 60 pages and then I'm like, I don't like this story anymore, delete. So I don't have any advice really on how to elongate a story, but I would just say make stuff up, and if you have an idea that if you do a good enough transition will fit into that story, do it. Because I know that actually Isabel and I came up with maybe 5 different ideas, all set in completely different genres, and now I have the task of fitting them all into one story. So I would just say if you have an idea and it's going to be like a wild story, just write it down, just use all the thesaurus words, get all those long extra word counts in.
And put me down for one of those books. I'm really interested in it.
And great presentation.
Great job. I'm just curious, when did you start writing actual short stories? How old were you?
Well, then that would have been last year, so 14, 13?
And then
that age?
when did you start actually writing? When you're younger?
Well, I've had English assignments of writing stories since maybe about grade 5, but I never really considered it seriously as a hobby until kind of grade 6, 7. So.
Great job.
Great job. This obviously depends on who's writing the story, but in your opinion, what's more scary, psychological horror or gory horror?
What do I think is the scariest
yeah,
book?
what's scarier?
I have to say the new It movie terrified the living daylights out of me. And the book I read, actually, Stephen King, I think actually does a very good job, is because you don't realize you're reading something that is potentially terrifying until it's too late and you're already reading it. And then you're like, oh my gosh, this woman is now on the floor. She's now having a heart attack. We went from she's sitting fine, and then now you're already engrossed in the story and you can't back out. The images are already in your head. So I think he does a very good job of that.
Great job. What genre of writing do you feel most comfortable doing?
Definitely, I feel I have the capacity to write more realistic stories as opposed to science fiction or fantasy. I have to really try hard because I want to be able to believe my own story in order to believe that other people would believe it. So I definitely believe that stories like A Criminal Tie and Case 189 that are closest to real life, and even A Grave of Sand, that I feel like I'm strongest in those areas, writing those types of stories that are closest to reality.
We're going to have one more question just because we're running over time. So Jen is going to.
Well done. I noticed there is a strong correlation between excellent writers and excellent readers, and you are an excellent writer. I'm wondering what you read. What do you love to read? What's your favorite thing to read?
Favorite thing to read? Oh gosh. I've been thinking about this quite recently, actually, and I don't really have a favorite genre. It's kind of actually what just strikes me as the most interesting. I do love like science fiction and like those kind of like technological, like Ender's Game or Eye of Mines. That book is actually quite good. I love that book. So definitely things that are like the opposite of what I'm good at writing, like the science fiction and the fantasy. Like I like reading that.
Okay, one more.
Is one of your anthologies going to be at the library?
Not at the moment.
Drat.
We will make sure that one of your anthologies is in the IPS library and maybe even the Bowen Island Library. And all Masterworks for the past 20 years are available at the school, so you can look back in time on those ones. Thank you so much. There's lots of questions for you still, but you're going to have to talk to Eden later. And we're going to take a short break and be back here a little bit after 11. And thank you so much, Eden.